Meditations with Ryan Slomak.
Hello, my fine friends, and welcome to episode 48 of Meditations. I'm your host, Ryan Zlomek, and this is a long-form interview show dedicated to making space for conversations. My hope is that you'll be able to learn from the guests on this and find some inspiration or find some lessons that you can take with you. And today we have somebody that I have learned a lot from over the last 20 years. We have Corey Trench on the show. Corey is a good friend of mine who I was in a band with way back in the day, and we made videos together. And then he took a jump, moved to Los Angeles, and has been rocking it out there. He started his career working as a production assistant on Parks and Recreation, eventually made his way from assistant editor to full-time editor on the TV show Teen Wolf, and then has worked on a ton of other cool projects like Tau for Netflix or Sci-Fi's Krypton, The Gifted for Fox, MTV's Eye Candy and Punk'd, and most recently Freevee's Leverage, Redemption, and Almost Paradise. But the thing that's really cool is that he has thought so deeply about the editing process, what it means to the greater mechanisms of movie making, that every time I talk to him, I find a new way to envision this whole motion picture experience. I hope you're able to do the same. So without further ado, let's get into this. Here is Corey Trench. Corey Trench, I have literally known you for over 25 years, so we're gonna just probably get to that as this whole thing progresses. But you know, if as people who've listened to the show know, there's a theme of me just being really curious about how our location guess sort of impacts us. And, you know, I'm broadcasting to you from Syracuse, New York. You're in the one and only, I think, Los Angeles, California, if I understand. And I'm
That's right.
curious about, like, you know, we're in Syracuse in the midst of coming out of third winter into fake to real summer. And I'm curious about, like, what's the weather like near you? And, you know, how is this transition to summer sort of like kicking off for you?
So Los Angeles, it's a little gloomy right now. It's like low 60s. Got some cloud coverage today. We really don't get the bright, sunny, consistent weather during this time. It usually happens late May and then early June, and then we go into June gloom, and then after that, July. It's just like sunny all the time. So but it's there's nothing to complain about living out here. I mean, when you're in the 60s or 70s and that's considered cold, like, yeah, there's nothing to complain about. We don't have seasons out here.
That's amazing. I've never heard the term June gloom before. Like how, tell me about how that impacts the residents of Los Angeles.
Oh, it's just an expected thing, because you would think, hey, summer is on its way. You know, we're in summer. Like we have to be in summer at that point. Well, not really. We get a lot of just like a lot of cloud coverage, a lot of smog that gets trapped in the atmosphere. So like just things are a little hazy, things are a little kind of like not as bright and sunny. But then you just wait 10 minutes and then things change. And then it's like bright and sunny, and then it goes back to the gloom again. But like I never knew that was a thing until I moved here. I just wore shorts all year round because I thought the weather was so great. And then I got used to the weather, and now I don't wear shorts all the time. I only wear shorts when it's actually hot, and that doesn't happen until July.
I love it. Well, I guess that means you're officially a West Coaster, even though it's been, you
Yep.
know, like well over a decade. So, you know, we were right before this broadcast. You know, I was clarifying some details about your, you know, your origin story, and you were born in Thousand Oaks, California. Um, and you know returned to the West Coast, which is really cool. I actually didn't know that part of your narrative. But I guess my question is like, you know, I know that you were somebody who like kind of moved around a number of times when you were a kid, but like when you think about home when you were younger, like where was that located?
You know, home for me and my most formative memories, is always going to be Rancho Marietta, because that was a community that um, I really grew up in, and my family was there for a long time. It's about 20 minutes outside of Sacramento. And yeah, just a lot of great childhood memories. But it's sort of a complicated thing because when we moved, when I was like 10 years old to Syracuse, I mean, that was sort of like the next half of like, again, my formative years where I'm like really discovering who I am and like what I want to do with my life. So Syracuse is kind of home too, in a way.
Well, let's first acknowledge that now I've already got the Corey Trench 3 act structure in my brain, and now but let's go back outside of Sacramento. Tell me about like what life was like kind of growing up. Like what was your home structure like, and what kind of fun things were you doing when you were a little kid?
I mean, it's the typical white picket fence suburban family upbringing. We rode our bikes everywhere. We had just a beautiful palatial view of a lake that was nearby. I played t-ball when I was a kid. I wanted to be a baseball player. My brothers and I had a nice backyard that we would play in. We would just take vacations to Hawaii because it was an easy plane ride to go there. And like that was life. I mean, it was just a very nice place to live. And then obviously when we moved, I at first was wondering why we had to move. And my parents told me, well, it's because we have a new life in Syracuse because dad has opportunities there. And then also there's better schools out there. And I kind of didn't understand how that all made sense. But then again, I'm 10 years old. And then I realized, we were really there because we had closed a chapter on California and we were growing up, my brothers and I, and it was just time to do something different because my whole family, we're a bunch of nomads. We never stick around in one place for too long. Yeah, we all felt, or my parents felt, that it was time to go. And so that's what we did. And it was a big culture shock in the beginning because you go from sunny weather to snowy weather.
Yeah, that's a bit of a change. What two questions about your younger years in California. One is what did your parents do professionally?
Yeah. So my dad was a consultant, he had his own business. And what he did was he helped write proposals to get government funding for these utility companies so they could do these projects that were subsidized by the government. And it was like grant proposal writing, so very specific type of writing. And he had to do presentations and all that, so it was a lot of entrepreneurial vigor that he had to put out there. And he was successful enough where he had his own company just consulting. And my mom was an English teacher, had all her degrees in teaching, and she especially liked teaching elementary school the best, but she had taught high school as well.
Thank you for the full view of the family dynamic. And now the second question about sort of the earlier years, and this is just because this is a theme that I think is going to come up in our conversation. Completely left field question. When did you develop a passion for Superman?
Very early, super early. And I know your podcast is more audio than video, but I still have posters and stuff on my wall of Superman. You can see back there. Yeah, that started, I think probably I was like 3, 4. I was watching the Christopher Reeve movies nonstop. My parents literally had the VHS tapes that, taped over, like, when it would go on TV, and both Superman 1 and 2. And yeah, that was in the background constantly. I was obsessed, absolutely obsessed. And then I got into the comics probably around 8 years old, started reading. Man, my collection sort of grew from there to an absurd point. But yeah, I've always liked Superman.
What was it about specifically about that character or that storytelling that like spoke to you?
I think it was different phases of my life. So when I was a child, it was probably like I liked the bright colors and flying. Like, who doesn't want to fly, right? As I got older, I think what drew me to the character was this is a person that has all the power. He's got superhuman abilities. He could be doing anything, and he decides he wants to help people. And I thought, that's interesting. And he's got this dual lifestyle because he's disguising himself as a Earthling, a reporter, Clark Kent, and he's Superman, but who is he really? He's really Clark Kent. I mean, that's really who he is as a person. But he assumes this identity of Superman, and he protects that identity, his personal identity as Clark Kent, for his personal life. And I thought, wow, that's kind of cool. Like to have a dual identity. What would that be like? To be a different person, assuming a different role, and then you can blend in, if so to speak. And the stories themselves were just like incredible because, like, how do you make a superpowered, invulnerable person interesting? And it turns out you can do a whole lot if you read the comics about, you know, what Superman does for other people, how he inspires other people, how other people inspire him, how the human race inspires him to do the right thing. Because that's what he's constantly struggling with, is always like, how do I fit in this world? And I think that's a very relatable thing.
Well, I'm going to apologize for leaping over tall buildings in a single bound and switching topics. But moving forward to, you moving to central New York and experiencing snow, you eventually eased in, you found me, and then obviously life became just so much more comfortable. What was that transition like for you and your family? Like, what was exciting about sort of moving to the other coast, and what things were you guys like a little bit apprehensive about?
We had been introduced to Syracuse because my grandmother lived there, my dad's mom, and we visited her, we were living in that she lived in that house that we lived in Jamesville. And so I think we had known, like, yeah, it snows a lot there, and we, at first as little kids, like, we love the snow, like it's so different, it's so fun, like this is exciting, it's just unique. So when we first moved there, I think the snow was very fun. And it was just like, oh, we can go tubing, we go snowboarding, we can play, we can throw snowballs. But then it became an obstacle because it's like, we have to shovel the driveway to get out because there's no other way to get out if we just let the snow pile up. Oh, it's cold, by the way. Yeah, your fingers are freezing off, and you have to wear a lot of layers. Also, the people are great, but they're a little honest, a little gritty, you know. So it's a little different. It was a making friends. It wasn't difficult, but you realized people could see through fakery very easily. Like, let's get to the point. Like, what are you really talking about? Like, what are you all about? You know, who are you? So I don't know if it was so much difficult as it was like, hey, I'm coming into the middle of a school year. I think I was there in the middle of, or just the start of fifth grade, and everyone had already got to know each other. And like, here's a new kid. How am I going to make friends? As you do when you're a kid, you adapt, you figure it out. And I made friends like pretty much right away, always with the nerdy kids, of course. And then I don't think it was until high school where that all changed again, because I realized as you get older, like your friend groups are going to change, you change. And so I had to start all over again, as it felt like. But it was kind of exciting because you're trying to figure out, who am I really? Like, what are my interests? Like, what are the things that I'm about? And that's, I think, right around the time you and I kind of were in the same social circles. Like, you end up running into the same people over and over again because you're friends with their friends, and like you're in the same classes. And then you start talking, you're like, oh, this guy's interested in the same things I'm interested in. And you start feeling each other out, and it sort of evolves from there. But yeah, it felt like I was like, the difficult part, I think, was I was kind of like moving towards the end of childhood, moving to a new place, having to make new friends, and then immediately going into my teenage years, which was kind of a big shift because then the friend groups changed again. It took a little bit of time to kind of like settle, like, who are my friends? Like, who really are my friends?
Yeah, so for listeners out there who are, kind of unfamiliar with the landscape of Syracuse, New York, Corey and I graduated from Fayetteville-Manlius High School, which is an eastern suburb, to be blunt, sort of a wealthier middle class, suburb with a tremendous art department and, a lot of resources we were really lucky to take care of. But one thing that also I think is interesting is like that our graduating class was 350 students. When people think about like upstate New York suburban high schools, I think they usually think like, oh, you graduated with four other kids or something. And, like we ended up graduating in a place where like you could try out a lot of different things. And I think that as I reflect on like the core, I'm lucky enough to have this like firsthand experience, like the Corey Trench experience is like one of the things that I always appreciated about you was that, pretty early on, I knew that like video storytelling was something that you wanted to do. But like I also recall like a magnificent passion for like classic rock and getting into drumming, and then like going through a phase where it was like, yo guys, I'm putting everything on pause for 4 months. I'm gonna like act in a play, and I'm gonna try this part of me. And I just think it's interesting that like, you, I think, really kind of found yourself, and you're one of the few people that I know that, like, if I ask Corey Trench as a sophomore in high school, what are you going to do when you're, nearing your fourth decade? Your answer probably would have been something along the lines of, like, I'm going to be in California working in the film industry. And here you are nearing your fourth decade in California, working in the film industry. So I guess I'm curious about, like, that little snippet of your existence like in high school about like exploring so many different means of storytelling and then eventually deciding that like video making was the part that you were most excited about.
That was a really interesting turn of events because I really credit two, actually three people for getting me into that. And the first person would be my dad, because my dad, when I ran on the cross country team, he really got into video making himself, like just hobby stuff, like filming home videos, but he wanted to edit them. And he had access to iMovie because we had all Apple products growing up, and he got really into editing these videos of me running, my other brothers doing their sports as well. So that was like his little side hobby. The other person I have to credit was my mom, because my mom noticed that when I would have conversations with my best friend our mutual friend, Greg Rigo, on the phone, she's like, you guys are so funny. You're just like bantering back and forth and just going off the top of your head and then going into one topic to the next. And you guys are just so, like, you guys are just such a great duo. And she goes, you guys should like make a show. And of course, the third person is the aforementioned Greg Rigo. So I had the video camera because my dad had the video camera. I had the editing software because, of course, that was there too, iMovie. And then, of course, I had the encouragement from my mom. She filmed Greg and I having a whole conversation at the dinner table. And then when it was time to edit it together, I was like, oh, let's try this, let's try that. I just sort of dove into it instinctually, thinking, well, let's get the funniest parts in the video and like, let's build something around it. So, do something more than just us sitting at the table. Let's do little skits. Let's like, just like funny things we would do normally, like us playing video games and adding commentary to it. Like, let's add that in there. And then like Greg would come up with ideas like, hey, we should film this, we should film that. And then I would just get the camera out and we would just riff forever. And then I just sort of found my entry point in doing that. Just like, I couldn't wait to like film stuff with Greg, edit it together, and then show our friends. I mean, that was the thing too. We would put it online. This is before YouTube. So we put it on like iCloud, and then I would give the link out to my friends like, hey, we made another video. And everyone was so encouraging, like, oh, this is so funny. You guys are like so hilarious or whatever. Like, and you're doing all these like stupid things, but it's so funny. So that was the entry point. But it didn't really like go into, oh, I want to be in the entertainment business. Like, this is what I want to do. It was sort of like, well, that's something I did and I liked it. But I also, like, as you mentioned, I wanted to try acting. I wanted to be in the fall play. And of course, like, they didn't give me the main role. I think it was A Midsummer Night's Dream. They were kind enough to give me a very small part, but an important part. I was a wrestler that kind of faced off against the main character. We had like a little fight, a fake fight, of course. And then that was when WWF was really popular. So I came up with a whole routine of, oh, you clothesline me, and then I'll do this, and then at the very end you give me the rock bottom. And that ended up being one of the most fun parts of the play. Like we just came up with this thing out of nowhere. I was into comics, like as we talked about. So at some point I wanted to be a comic book writer. So I had all these different things I wanted to try: poetry, being in a band, be a rock star, all these things. But what was it that like really sold me on it? That didn't happen till later, way later.
Are we talking way later college years? Or are we talking way later high school years?
College years.
All right. Well, let's stay in high school
Yeah.
for a minute.
Okay. Yeah, sure.
Just because I think that there's like one pretty large thing in your high school experience that I think we need to talk about because, once again, we were very fortunate to go to a school that had a tremendous amount of resources. But one of the things that we had is we had closed circuit television, within all of our classrooms. And, kind of in the lifetime that we were there, they devoted time to a class called broadcast journalism. And one of the things that made our school I think fairly unique for the time. Like I think, talking about the Greg and Corey show that you guys just did, is you were basically making YouTube content before there was even a distribution service to send it out. Like you're making shows and you're like, hey, here's this iCloud download link. It took me 4 days to upload it. You guys should download it, and in about 36 hours, maybe you can watch an episode. And like it was very much this like internal thing. And then all of a sudden we have this distribution network called an entire school of 1,200 people, where every morning they film the morning announcements, and then after the morning announcements, there has to be some skit or some content that ends up being distributed. And it wasn't until years later that I realized how much that system really like brought out so much creative energy, because anybody could sign up for that course. You didn't have to have a portfolio. You didn't have to like get a note. And all of a sudden you're in a class where, okay, you're learning how to film the announcements. You're understanding how to talk without using your uhs and your ums, which is a skill I still have not learned. And then you have, okay, all this extra time, you need to go make a film because we need it tomorrow by 7 a.m. And if there's one person that graduated in the Fayetteville-Manlius class of 2004 that I saw utilize those resources and that distribution network more than anyone else, it was the only Corey Trench. So, like, tell us a little bit about, I guess I just gave the overview about what this was, but tell us about the type of content you created for these, for these morning skits.
Yeah. So, yeah, broadcast journalism, that class, yeah, again, it just opened up a whole new avenue. And you could do a bunch of different type of things. You could be the host, you could be the camera person, and quite frequently you had to rotate. You had to sometimes be a host, even though I was more interested in the video editing, obviously. So that was what I focused on. But you would have to occasionally do the other things in the class. Well, I was really inspired by the older kids in my on my cross country team, who when in my sophomore year, like the juniors and the seniors, they were the ones making funny videos in those segments that played after the announcements. I thought they were hilarious. I was like, wow, this is like really funny. And you could tell like there were always varying degrees on the announcements, like the cool segments versus like someone just did this because it was an assignment. It would be like boring. Like I remember one that was like called Shoes, and it was just people walking the hallways, and that was it. And of course, you would hear the commentary like, "Oh man, that sucked. Like that was boring. That's all they did." So there was this impetus, like, "Hey, people are watching this. Like you got to put some effort into it to get people's attention." So I was inspired by the classes ahead of us that I put effort into it, and I remembered their segments, and I thought, okay, yeah, if I'm gonna do anything, like that's got to be funny, or it's got to at least put some production value into it to get people to notice what we're doing. And that's when it kind of all clicked when I met Steve Benson, who was also in that same class. And I think it was in a year before us, but he was in that class, and he was a camera person. Like that was his thing. Like I like to do camera work. And I'm like, great. I like to do the editing. So you can be the camera person. I'll be the one editing. And yeah, and when it came to coming up with ideas, I think I was really coming up with them on my own, but also using Greg and then also our lunch table. In terms of the social strata, I think we were probably like a combination of burnouts and nerds and like punks and also just all sorts of different types, but we all got along. So anyway, when it came to coming up with ideas, like I think one of the first ones that was like a major hit was hall monitors in training. And the whole idea was, we had these hall monitors in high school, they acted like they were like police officers. So I was like, hey, we should do like a funny like cop kind of sketch where like it's over the top, it's played for laughs, like 70s cop style, Keystone Cops kind of stuff with the hall monitors. And of course, we all played the different hall monitors with a 70s style vibe to it. And it was just like doing pratfalls, doing silly things, acting all serious, but doing it for just the pure comedy of it. And I edited that together with that in mind. Like this is an over the top cop show and we're going to make it really silly. And that played on the announcements. And I didn't think, I thought, I don't know. I don't know what kind of reaction this is going to get, but that was the first time somebody came up to me afterwards. He's like, dude, that was hilarious. Like you guys nailed that. That was so funny. And the even bigger compliment was the hall monitors actually thought it was funny. They actually liked it. And, that was just all the encouragement I needed to keep doing more and more of these sketches that were like, just again, like big production value, costumes, over the top. Like, how can we do more and more to get people excited, and get people's attention?
Yeah, and let me shed some light on this too, because I mean, first of all, like if you hear the pitch, hall monitors in training, like that gives you a pretty awesome mental image. But to take it a step further, I mean, there was the development of props in the form of like gigantic Magnum PI mustaches for all these 16-year-old, 15-year-old kids who are pretending they're hall monitors. You were able to wrangle some of the hall monitors to be in the film as like, like the sort of like overarching administrative presence for these younger hall monitors that were there. And you were able to put it all together into a solid minute and a half story that was filmed in such a compact period of time. And I think there's something to be said about like being young and having all this time and all this energy and being like, we're going to do this thing, but like not everybody captivates that energy. And then from there, Corey made a film called The Quest to Get Chicks, which was like like a Lord of the Rings tale about like a bunch of guys who are trying to get attention from women. Another one called Extreme Sledding, which was like a news broadcast about people going and sledding on these like hills that clearly are super dangerous.
So dangerous.
So dangerous. The one I wanted to talk about just for a second before we move on to you studying this professionally is and I can't remember the exact term, but it was all about people stealing books from the library or making it so it looked like you were stealing books from the library.
So Steve Benson told this story about how at his old school, they did this prank on each other where as you were leaving the library and going through the detectors, obviously there's a system where you check out books, they scan it, this whole thing, it's a whole system. Well, if you wanted to prank somebody, what you would do is you would put books in their backpack without them knowing it, and they would walk out and the loud buzzer would just go off, and then they would feel like, wait, what? I'm not trying to steal books. And there'll be all this confusion. It was just like chaos or whatever. And he did this for real one time, and I saw it and I was like, that is so funny. It's just so hysterical. Again, it was just like, how do you make something out of that? I'm like, I want to make I want to tell a story about that. I don't necessarily want to just film a prank and that's it, because like, obviously like that wouldn't have flown very well, but like, let's do a fake news report on the epidemic of book framing and why it's really bad and you shouldn't do it. So that way we could kind of get around the fact that we're pulling pranks, kind of. We were doing fake pranks. It ended up being very funny and just really silly. But I do think after that, people were actually doing it a lot more because we drew attention to the fact that you could do that. And, luckily it was plausible deniability. Like, look, we didn't tell anyone to do this. We said, don't do this. And then that was my introduction to kind of like doing a little bit of improv. Like you had an idea of like, is this a story? But kind of letting people talk and then find the best bits. Like our friend Phil Shank, I think he had the best line in the entire piece when he goes, book framing is really bad. I think it's an act of terrorism on the libraries. That was all Phil. I didn't tell him to say that. And then that's the kind of stuff you're like, look, this guy's hilarious. Let's put him in, like have him say stuff. And that was our whole friend group. That's why I picked you guys, because you guys are really funny.
I think you did. I'll just be blunt and say, like, I didn't appear in very many of them because everyone else was way more talented than me, and I am completely fine with that. But I think that one of the things that was really cool was that, like, so often in the arts, people struggle to bring together the community to say, nah, we're going to make this vision happen, even though Corey's going to get credit for it. Like, this is a thing we're all going to do, and we're all going to be proud of. And, two things kind of came from that. One is that, I think it built in a lot of sort of like unintentional leadership in you to be like, oh, like I am directing people. Like, okay, we're going to improv this, but I can choose for Phil to say something because I know he knows what to do, and we've done this enough times that like he can fill in the soundbite in 4 seconds, and if that one doesn't work, we'll try the next one, and that's like a really amazing masterclass for a 16-year-old. But then the other thing too that happened, despite the fact that book framing might have actually become an act of terrorism in that school, after the video had come out, was that like you actually have like teachers that like were into it and were ready to go. Our late great teacher, Mr. Ball, rest in peace, is in that video, and
Yes.
also ad libs, elements to it. And then the videos would come out, and the teachers around school would actually inquire with everyone who was part of this production unit, and just be like, "How'd you get away with that one?" And like, the librarians can be like a little finicky. Like, how did you convince them to like voluntarily let you send off the alarms and things like that? And it just, I don't know. I think there's just so much more to this narrative than just like, I made the video. It's also, I learned new forms of storytelling every time I did something. Here's the news broadcast. Here's the skit. Here's the, just pure piece of Saturday Night Live satire. It was just sort of a remarkable thing.
Well, thank you, first of all. But I think a lot of it was just like not being formally trained and not knowing what the rules are really gives you this confidence and this freedom to just try things. And some of it is like, well, I've seen this in other videos, or you're trying to mimic a newscast. Like, what do they do? Like, what kind of stuff do they do? But like, you don't think about it. You don't try to intellectualize it. You just go, well, let's do it. Let's try this. Okay. So you're holding the mic and you're going to duck out behind this bookshelf. It's just a cool like introduction to a person talking into the mic rather than just talking. Okay. How are we going to get the sound of the beeping and not make the librarians angry? Well, Steve came up with the idea of like, okay, what we're going to do is I'll do it one time. I'll try to go through. We'll get the beeping, and then boop, boop, boop. And then it's just the one time. And then we got the audio for it. And then we can use that consistently throughout the piece. So we're not actually doing it multiple times. And then Steve had that great, we shot Steve pretending to go through the detector with books in it. When we didn't do that in actuality, he just acted like, oh no, the alarm went off, and we just put in the sound. So it was all kind of like thinking of like the necessity of like how to do it without causing too much of a disturbance, and like actively filming in the library, which was also very like, I don't know how we got away with that. I just think we just kind of snuck little pieces here and there. And then like, it just all kind of came together. just did a little bit at a time just to not cause too much of a problem. But yeah, I do think the school in general, to your earlier point, is like they encouraged us in the sense of like, if you were filming something that was fun and it's for a project, in general, they were very on board. Like teachers would help you get involved. Mr. Ball, of course, amazing guy, one of the best teachers we ever had. Very funny, very smart guy. Like he got the idea instantly, but his part was very much like the don't do this. You should not be doing this as part of the PSA, if you will. I also thought it was very, very sobering when he did pass away. And I remember when there was a tribute video that they were going to make for him, I remember the people that are putting it together reached out and they say, "Hey, do you still have that footage of Mr. Ball?" And I just remember the power of that, like, oh, capturing someone on video is such a powerful thing. Like it's so like that's forever. You always want to make it count for something. Like you always want to put a lot of, capturing someone in the way that, it's going to be remembered forever. So like that to me was like, yeah, it was very humbling to be asked about that and stuff like that. So yeah, it's a silly little sketch, but there's a lot of, like you said, there's a lot of intricate parts about it that I think add up in the end. And a lot of it was just doing it on the fly, having people that were very helpful in wanting to make it good. Everybody wanted to make it good. I mean, they saw how enthusiastic I was about wanting to make it, and then that made them enthusiastic.
That's awesome. Well, you end up going to Onondaga Community College and then to Ithaca College to study film. What made you eventually like decide like, okay, this is what I'm going to spend the next 4 years of my life studying?
That was an interesting trajectory because after senior year, especially going to FM, that school was all about achievement and sometimes overachievers. Like you had to be in 4 AP classes, advanced placement classes. You had to do a sport. You had, what extracurriculars are you doing? And this is all to build towards going to a good school because you got to go to a good school or else like your life adds up to nothing. I mean, this was kind of like they were trying to drill that into you. Like you got to have a plan. Got to have a plan.
If you don't aim for achievement and take all those AP courses, Corey, you could turn into us.
You could turn into us easily. You don't want that. Look at this. This is the PSA right here. Yeah, so I think there was a lot of pressure to make a decision like this is what you're going to do the rest of your life, right? So I wasn't even sold on the idea that I was going to be a filmmaker. I was thinking I would be a radio DJ. Like I was sort of getting into that. I was like, that would be cool, right? That'd be fun. And I did get into a 4 year Franklin Pierce up in New Hampshire. And, I went to go check it out with my mom. And, it was a nice school. They had good facilities. But this little voice in my head was kind of talking to me on our way back. And I was like thinking, do I really want to commit to this? Like, does this feel right? And I decided it wasn't right. And I didn't exactly know why, but I just had this feeling that it wasn't the right path. And I remember talking to mom and I said, "Hey, mom, would you be upset if I went to Onondaga Community College?" Now, back in the FM days, again, there was not a lot of encouragement to go to community college. In fact, everyone kept calling that's the dumb school. That's a stupid school. Like that's where all the burnouts go. That's where your life's over if you go to OCC. Like that was the thought. My mom, amazing, amazing person, along with my dad. So encouraging, so supportive throughout all of this. She goes, "Well, no, if you think that's the right thing to do, you should do that." And my plan was I wanted to figure out my life in those 2 years. Like, what do I really want to do? I could get my gen eds out of the way. I could take classes that were specific to video making at Onondaga Community College. So it's sort of like a bigger version of broadcast journalism. They had more equipment, they had more specific classes in editing, all that stuff. So it wasn't like I wasn't doing what I wanted to do. It was like, okay, let's get more specific. Let's do a stress test. Like, let's see if this is actually what you're into. And my parents were totally on board, like, yeah, like take all the time you need. And like, it's a great idea. And it's a lot cheaper to go to a 2 year than a 4 year. So I did that. During that time, I got the idea on my own to make a film that you were in, of course, called Born Under a Bad Sign. My first attempt at making an actual film with a script and really doing special effects work, like actually going for it. I want to see if this is what I like to do. I didn't think it was going to be perfect, but I wanted to give it my best shot. And I wanted to see, okay, if I still like doing this at the end of that, doing it on my own, then I know this is the right thing. And so we did that. We filmed it, I don't know, for a couple of months on and off. Of course, everyone had different schedules. You had to, figure out what the locations are. You had to figure out like who's available to do what. It was very like slapdash, but also tried my best to plan around everyone. And it got made. I loved working on it. It was so much fun. I think we had a blast doing it. And at the end of the day, I was like, man, I want to keep doing this. Like, I want to get better at this. Like, this is the thing that is exciting. So, radio was not my thing anymore. It was going to be this. After I graduated Onondaga Community College, I knew exactly where I wanted to go because I knew from talking to a lot of people that like, and reading a lot of books, that's like, okay, there's only two places if you want to like jumpstart your career in the entertainment business. It's either New York or Los Angeles. Those are two places. There's no other place where you're going to meet as many creatives than those two places. Specifically, I checked out New York City. There was School of Visual Arts. I was looking into that, but Ithaca was so appealing to me because it was close enough to home where I could be like, okay, I could have the dorm room experience and all that, but I was close to home to if I needed to go home, I could. Also, Ithaca had an internship program in Los Angeles, and they had Ithaca alum that were working in the entertainment business, in television specifically. And to have that, I think really kind of sold me on the idea like, this is the school I need to go to. I can test out if I like Los Angeles for 3 months as I do my internship. And then if I still like it, I can reach out to an alumni network to see if I can find work, which is what I did. So that all kind of came later. All the filmmaking and like going to Los Angeles, that all came much later.
Well, that's okay. We can jump timelines here. We have that power. I remember. So I think that alumni network thing at IC was like huge. If I recall, you ended up like connecting with the director of Hoop Dreams.
He was such an interesting guy because he basically told me, like in documentaries, because that's what I was interested in, making documentaries. He basically said, hey, there's like no money in this. Like, you do it because you love it and you get the funding through like your friends or like some investors. Like, it takes time. You'll be working on documentaries for years. So you really have to have a lot of spinning plates. You have to have a lot of projects going. It can't just be one project and that's it. So he really kind of like impressed that upon me. And he saw my thesis film that I had made at Ithaca, which was called The Last Tree in LA, which is kind of an experimental film about the different sides of Los Angeles, or the ones that I was exposed to when I was there for the 3 months. So there was like the chaotic Hollywood, loud, boisterous part. And then there was this really peaceful, serene nature part. And it's just sort of like talking about people's dreams and what they wanted to do. And it got really quiet. And you could hear voiceover of like people talking about life and all this stuff. So he saw that and he was like, oh, this is great. Like, this is a really awesome tone film. I'm like, oh, cool. That's encouraging, but I don't think I got my real education on like, this is what you got to do to get into the business and get ahead, until I was at my internship, Rugged Entertainment. Rugged Entertainment is a documentary feature company. They specifically have a niche directing or making documentary projects about rappers and urban culture. And specifically, we were working on a project about rappers that were in jail. and talking about that life. Like, what is it like to live that life? And then what do you do after that? I remember the guy that was the head of the company. We were working out of his place. Like, it wasn't like a studio. It was like his place, and he had all the editing equipment there, all the camera equipment. Like, it was a one-stop shop. Like, this is where it all gets made. Did all the interviews there and whatnot. He really educated me on, like, one of the things you want to do when you get connected with people is you gotta reach out to them. You got to keep in touch with them. You got to keep that relationship going. And that kind of opened up a side to me that was like, okay, networking, that's important. Staying on top of relationships, super important, because you never know where it's going to lead. Because you work on a project here, you get paid a little money, or maybe you do it for free. But then the person kind of sees your talent and they go, hey, I want to keep working with you. And maybe that leads to another gig, to another person who's going to pay a little more. And then maybe that person recommends you to somebody else. And then next thing you know, you're working an actual job. And the Ithaca connection kind of came about early on when I reached out to an alum, David Rogers, who edited on The Office. And I talked to him at an alum event, and I went up to him, and this is back when I had moved to Los Angeles in 2009, didn't have a job lined up or anything. I just moved there. Like, I just heard you got to jump in. You can't expect to line up a job. And I talked to him. I said, hey, do you know anyone that's hiring? And he said, oh, well, just email me. Here's my email. Remind me who you are. Give me a resume, and I'll see what's out there. And he hooked me up with another Ithaca alum. And that person was a post supervisor on the show Parks and Recreation. And that's when I got my first job in the industry as a post PA. So that all kind of coalesced into this whole thing of like learning, sink or swim very early on. It's about networking. It's about following up. And it's about just doing whatever you can to get in. Just get in, just try everything you can to be a part of a community of people. And then that's how you really get your career going at that point.
Well, and I think it's interesting too. I mean, not to beat a dead horse on this, but like that inherent sort of like networking component of your existence like has just played out so beautifully. And then the other thing that's played out, really well for you to kind of enter the industry is your ability to how do I say this? Like beautifully push together and manipulate what is right and wrong and what is truth and fiction when talking with people. And if I recall, you had some really curious responses when they interviewed you to be a production assistant on Parks and Recreation.
So when I moved here, I didn't have a car. Didn't know if I needed one. Turns out, yeah, you do, because LA is a car town. Public transportation, it's there, but it's very limited. So when you're a post PA, your job, one of your jobs is to drive around and pick things up and deliver them to other people. We're talking getting lunch. We're talking getting tapes so they can do the online finishing. We're talking dropping off DVDs of edits, outputs to the producers that live in Santa Monica. Oh, by the way, you live in Burbank, so that's like, a 45 to an hour drive to get there, so you got to think about the traffic and all that stuff. So when I interviewed for the job, and they're like, at the very end, they're like, you seem like a great candidate. Do you have a car, right? And I instantly said, yes. Uh, so I had to, I mean, I could have said no, of course, but then they would have been like, well, we can't hire you because this is a job that requires a car. But, you say what you got to say to get the job. So after I said yes, I thought, well, okay, so how am I going to figure this out? And the solution I came up with is like, okay, I'm going to rent a car for 2 weeks. And thankfully, my dad was just so forward thinking. And I told him, like, yeah, I got the job. Great. So I have money, income, which is going to help pay for a car payment. But I don't have a line of credit because I've never had a credit card. So my dad had to do the research to get a used car, and put his name on the loan so I could actually get the loan. We settled on a 2007 Toyota Corolla, which I still drive to this day because it's an amazing car. And it's I've never had any problems with it. But that all happened within a couple of weeks period where like I was on the phone with my dad and he was connecting me to the dealership and I had to go over and talk to them and they gave me a test drive and and I got to sign some paperwork and then they were like, okay, like, here you go, here's your car. And then the money that I was making from the job at Parks and Recreation, part of that was going into my car payment. And I was like, okay. So I jump started my whole getting a car thing, thankfully, but I kind of did it backwards where I got the job first before I got the car. That to me is an example of like, when you're trying to get a job for yourself and you're really trying to put yourself in the best position possible, it's very easy to talk yourself out of it because you're like, well, I don't have the thing. I don't have the thing I need. But if you think outside the box a little bit and you go, well, I can get the thing, I can learn on the job. I can, like, if there's a skill you don't know, like you can learn stuff on the job quite easily. I mean, there's so many people that do that in this business. I did the exact same thing later on when I went to my first scripted show, Teen Wolf, and I had learned on Final Cut my whole life. And they told me, this is an Avid based show. You know Avid, right? And I said, yep. And I had very little knowledge of Avid. And boy, did I have to do a crash course on learning how to use Avid. I can tell you after a season, I got really knowledgeable. But again, this is another example. I could have said, sorry, like I don't know it. And I wouldn't have gotten the job and I wouldn't have learned and I wouldn't have been working. Yeah, it's just an example of like, you can make a choice. Like it's always a choice. Like if you don't feel comfortable doing that, that's totally fine. It can be very stressful. It's not for everyone. But if you're really trying to put yourself in the right career path, a lot of times, if you just say yes and you figure it out later, it ends up working out.
So you're a post-production assistant on Parks and Recreation, which ends up becoming like a cult hit, right? Like, I mean, it's a show now where like as people will just binge watch The Office, it's like, oh, I finished The Office, I guess I got to start Parks and Rec, and then they'll watch the whole thing, and then they'll do it 30 million times until the world comes to extinction. And I guess what I'm curious about is like, having been somebody who, for lack of a better term, was like making the sausage, like you were somebody who was, you made Born Under a Bad Sign, you make all these other films, you're like in complete and utter control of all the stuff that you're making. And then, you do an internship and you start to see just the grand scale that changes when you're just making a little DIY video for yourself. And then you make it to, LA in the industry where like, the one job you had making your thing in Syracuse is now done by 25 different people and like little components. And now you're within those gears. How did it feel being a part of that specific project? Like being a part of Parks and Recreation, like, were you aware of how strong that material was, or was it something where you were so far removed that it just kind of felt like a job?
It was a whirlwind because I was getting used to driving around Los Angeles. So that was new. I was meeting a lot of people that worked on the production and knowing what they did and like, oh, so I have to talk to this person so I can get this person what they need. And there really wasn't a lot of time to sit in the edit room because I was so busy running around. So it felt like kind of a blur. But I think the main thing that it taught me is that I don't think anyone knew anything, like if it was going to be a hit or anything like that. In fact, I think the first season, I think everyone was like, "Oh, we're just trying to figure it out. Like we're trying to figure out like how is this different than The Office, and like what worked with The Office that we could put into this, but let's try to make it, not exactly like The Office." So there was a lot of experimentation and figuring out. And I don't think it was until the second season, which I wasn't on. The second season, I think, is when they really found their footing. Like this is like, this is the show. But I remember early on, they were trying a lot of different things. Like, oh man, how do we make this funny? And it's comedy is so hard. Like it is the most difficult thing to be funny. And I think early into that show, I don't think we really knew it was going to be a hit. We knew all the cast was very talented, but aside from Amy Poehler, like everyone else was kind of like you barely knew who they were. I mean, they were character actors and they were really great. Audrey Plaza was not a household name. Nick Offerman, he's a great guy, really nice, but he was kind of new too. And yeah, like it just felt so, I think we just weren't sure what it was going to be. And then when I heard that they had success, I was really happy because I was like, wow, it couldn't happen to some better people. I mean, because they worked so hard to make that show great. Oh, and Chris Pratt too, by the way. Yeah, that was back when Chris Pratt was like some guy. Like, who is this guy? you know? And next thing you know, he's Guardians of the Galaxy. Like, what? How'd that happen? Yeah, that was pretty wild. Looking back on that. Like that whole cast is like now it's no surprise why that show was a hit because everyone in that cast was super talented.
I know you ended up doing a pretty significant stint on Teen Wolf. Like, at what point did it feel like your routine was actually becoming a routine as opposed to just like, and then I need the next job and the next job and the next job?
I don't think that ever ended. I always felt like I was never sure 100% about when the next job was happening. I know at one point Teen Wolf did feel like a full-time job because I did it for 6 seasons. So we did have planned hiatuses, but there were periods of time where it was like 6 months off, sometimes 8 months off. But when it was really cooking, like, yeah, there would be like 3 months off. Like, yeah, you'll be back in 3 months. I'm like, whoa. And I remember everyone saying like, this is amazing. This rarely happened where you're on a show that's a hit and it keeps going. Nowadays, it's like they're 3 seasons and it's over. But that was 6 seasons and I was on season 2. But yeah, like I don't think I ever really had that feeling of like security where like you just know like yeah, it's just gonna last forever. And like, I don't have to worry about finding work. Like it's always in the back of your head. Well, when this is over, like the show's gonna end. What's next? I kind of knew when the show was ending, like for like 6 seasons, and that was it. And then had to make a decision of whether I wanted to stay on and be a co-editor. So it's like an editing role, but like you're really assisting and you're editing the episode with the editor. Like so you don't get sole editing credit. So I had to make a decision whether I wanted to keep doing that on this show and keep getting those credits, or knowing that the show was ending, it's like, well, what's next? And then that's when I got a call to work on a pilot for the show Krypton, which kind of all circles back to Superman from earlier, because that ended up being a prequel show to Superman's homeworld, Krypton.
Sure. And because listeners know that I just can't let things go, we're going to stay at Teen Wolf for one more second.
Yeah, sure.
And because one really important thing happens there that, at least from what I understand, is that, you had been an assistant editor for a long time. You had been on the TV show Punk'd. You'd been on a bunch of different things, right? And, I remember being in correspondence with you about Teen Wolf and being like, oh, yeah, I got to like edit this little sequence or whatever. And like, it's not uncommon. Like, I mean, I think everybody knows Clint Eastwood as being this like amazing director, but like his first directorial part was the jumper scene in the movie Dirty Harry. Like Don Siegel was like, you direct this part. And he's like, really? He doesn't get credit for it, but like that was the first thing that he did as like an experiment. And I think, in an industry where hundreds of millions of dollars is always at stake, whether it's for merchandising or for whatever, easing people in and ensuring that you're hiring the right talent at the right time is like a really big thing. And you paid your dues at Teen Wolf, and then eventually, if I understand correctly, on season 6, episode 6, Ghosted, I've got this beautiful screenshot on my phone that just says editor Corey Trench. There's no other name there, and that was, I think, the first time that you had completely taken over the ranks of editing. Like, tell me about like that accomplishment.
Well, I got to give a lot of credit to a couple people on that one. So the people that got me the job as assistant editor on Teen Wolf in the first place were Tara and Ed Abrams. Tara was a post supervisor on Punk'd, MTV's Punk'd, and her husband Ed was an editor on Teen Wolf. Tara knew, as I was assisting on Punk'd, that I had a number of days working as an assistant on, well, and punked it, just to clarify further, there's a difference between the union show and a non-union show. Most reality television is non-union. And it just means that like they're not governed by the same rules of like lunch breaks and overtime and all that stuff that a union show is. And there are union shows that are reality as well, but I was on a non-union show, Punked, and Teen Wolf was a union show. So she was the one that was like, hey, you have enough hours or enough days working as an assistant that you could technically join the union. But before you can do that, I want my husband to interview you to see if you would be right for the job. I think you'd be perfect for the job. In fact, I want him to hire you because I like that you have a good personality. You show up early. You seem really eager to want to work in scripted television, which Teen Wolf was, a scripted show. I say you go in for the interview, see if he likes you. And so Ed interviewed me. I had the least experience, but he liked me and said, hey, I want to give this kid a shot. So I immediately, upon joining the show, I got to join the union because I had a number of hours. All of it was kind of I was helped out by Tara in that regard. And that is what started the whole career working on Teen Wolf. Now, to go into learning the art of not only editing, but assistant editing, that was all Teen Wolf. Like assistant editing is very technical. You kind of learn a little bit at a time, but like you start to get of the rhythm of what it's like. It's like preparing the dailies, and then you start helping with the sound design. You start helping with like the temp VFX. You start to understand how the show comes together through working with your editor. And your editor is the one that is sort of like assuming a mentor figure role, because any good editor wants their assistant to eventually move up. You know, they have a relationship, and obviously like you're integral to their workflows as a team member. But at a certain point, you know, your editor will be like, hey, you're ready for the next step because I see what you can do. They give you a little bit, you know, they give you a scene, they give you notes on the scene. They start to teach you like about rhythm and pacing and the style of the show. And they see if you can do it. And if you show the right enthusiasm, you show you're willing to work hard, and you start to get a little bit more confident each time. They give you a little bit more. They have you sit with directors like, hey, like, look at the scene Corey did. You want to give any notes to Corey? And then you start to learn that whole process. And then things get a little bit more and more and more and more to the point where like you're editing half the episode and you're assisting at the same time. Like you're doing a little bit of both, but you do it because you're like you said, you're earning your stripes, you're paying your dues. So the editing full-time editor position didn't really open up until I had been on the show again for a number of seasons. We're talking like at least 4 seasons. And there had been assistants that had done the same, that had moved up. So it prior to me, so like it was kind of like implied that like, hey, you do this a number of years, we're gonna give you a shot. But like you said, a lot of times like they don't want to just give it to people that they don't trust with the material. Like you have to have been there long enough to know the show, understand how it works, and like really again like earn that trust. I was very patient, and knowing the fact I would advocate for myself, but knowing that like one day it's going to come. And that's when it came in season 6. And that was a whole education in and of itself, is like learning now I'm responsible for a whole episode. Like that's a big deal. That's a lot of responsibility. Again, learning on the job. It's just like, oh, now I understand what you have to do to get a cut to work properly. And sometimes you have to make it work in the sense of like one person, the showrunner, it's like their show. So you got to do it the way they want you to do it. And also solve problems. Like sometimes the footage isn't great. Like we'll get horrible footage sometimes. Sometimes it happens. Performance isn't very good, but your job is to make it good so people don't notice that it was a bad performance. There's so many little things you learn along the way of like, yeah, like you got to go a little bit further in the job to be a successful editor. And the most successful editors their producers, their showrunners have complete trust in them. It's like, oh, I know Sally's got this. Like she's gonna like fix the show. I trust her to like really come up with creative ways to solve the problem that I'm having with this episode. Like those are the top of the top. But sometimes you gotta take your time and build the relationships with the producers, with directors, and then they gradually start to give you more of that trust. But in the beginning, I think it's a lot of like listening and doing what you're being asked to do. Like just do what they tell you to do because it's their show. I mean, ultimately, it comes on them. Like all the pressure's on them if it doesn't work. So I think it's learning that push and pull of the relationship.
So how did the dynamic change specifically for that episode? I mean, you've got this like you're kind of under the wing of the editor for, the prior 4 years, and all of a sudden you're the one who's able to sort of make that call, to take on that responsibility, to make choices. If I recall, I think you were the one that like encouraged them to use the Duran Duran clip. Like in that episode, you were able to make like an actual like audio call. I mean, like that's a pretty substantial change in the approach to your work.
Well, that was something that, well, to get the opportunity, it had to come from Ed because Ed, my editor, was the one that advocated for me. Like Corey's ready. If there's a position available, because that's the thing, a position has to open up for you to take it. So the position opens up. I think Corey's ready. So he was the one that really helped me talk. He talked to producers. Like he's been doing it long enough. Like we should give him a shot. When it came to working on the actual episode, it was an 80s flashback episode. The director, Russell McKay, he was the director of all the Duran Duran's music videos. Because of that, he had a great relationship with the band, of course. And I remember he had said, hey, like this scene needs an 80s song. And I thought, oh, what about a Duran Duran song? He's like, oh, yeah, that'd be great. How about Hungry Like the Wolf? And he's like, oh, yeah, that would be great. That would be kind of fun. Teen Wolf, Hungry Like the Wolf. That all came from him. He was the one that obviously like he had to be the one to advocate for the idea. Like he had to like it first and then show it to him like, hey, this is what it's going to be like. He's like, oh yeah, like this is awesome. Like let's send it to the band and get their approval. And they got like a deal because of the relationship. So yeah, being an editor, like it is about throwing ideas out. If someone tells you, hey, we need a song in here, we need a cue in here, and sometimes they have an idea and you just put it in what they say, like, okay, put this song in. And then other times you get that space. They allow you that space to be like, well, I don't know exactly what needs to happen in this scene, but it needs something. And then that's when you kind of have that opportunity to really put yourself out there creatively and make a pitch, make a suggestion. I think any editor knows that like you're a collaborator, like you're part of the process of making this show, making this movie. So having an opinion, having a lane to make the show and movie as best possible, it's always to serve the greater good of making the show great. So if you have that in you and you have that ability to make a pitch and be, have a good opinion behind it, I mean, sometimes you get a good response from that.
Yeah, I think it's interesting just because so often when, like all the movie making documentaries that people watched in the 80s and 90s, just like you assume that the editor is just like a chain smoking, like, like just leathery guy in a basement somewhere, like making choices, and then the editor or the director comes in and either loves it or hates it, and then they sit there together and chain smoke together, and then that's it. That's the whole thing. The movie's over. And, especially with the advent of digital video, which is the era that you found yourself in, like there just ends up being the ability to just shoot so much more coverage at a lower cost than there had been, which means that the editor ends up with so many more decisions to make and so much more control over those decisions. Like historically it would be like you edit the thing and then the sound design is somebody else's problem because that's a whole different set of technology. But like, if you're using Final Cut Pro or you're using iMovie or you're using Avid or you're using Premiere Pro or whatever it is, like most of those decisions can at least be made in the editing room before they get sent off to other departments to be finalized. And that's a very different role than what the editor had been even 10 years before you entered the industry.
There's this funny story, like editing back in the day, Dragnet, the way Dragnet is cut, it's like you see the person talk and then you're cutting to them as they're talking, and then the other person talks and you just cut to them as they're talking, and then you do that back and forth, and then the scene's over. And there was this joke that, like, I guess, so the editors in that era, all they did was cut the slates off and have 3 martini lunches. I don't know if that's true, but it was a different style, a different expectation back then because of the technology at the time, the moviola. Like, yeah, you only had a certain number of tracks, audio, you didn't have a lot. There wasn't a lot you could do. Running film is tough. Cutting film is even tougher. So, and TV had to move so fast, even back then. Like, you didn't have time to, like, get artsy, so to speak. With the advent of digital editing, a lot of it changed to where, well, now we can do whatever we want. We can go to different takes very quickly, and you can watch everything. Back then, it used to be just the circle takes, Now it's like all the takes. So the circle takes are, for anyone who doesn't know, are the favorite takes of the director. Now it's like you see everything. Everybody wants to watch all the takes. Show me all the times this guy says, "Hey," in the scene. I want to pick the best one. It's like that granular. The expectation, as you pointed out, is that when someone watches a cut, even if it's an early cut, they want to feel like it's the show. They want to have that confidence in knowing, like, it's working. Because if you don't put sound effects in there, if you don't put music in there, if you don't put temp VFX in there, it feels incomplete. You can't just cut picture anymore. You have to do these little detailed things that add up to making the show feel like it's real, like you could air it on television. It's been set up that way as an expectation because, as you pointed out, the technology has caught up. So now that is the baseline for editing in television and movies. You have to do that stuff. Now, there are different roles out there. Like, you can have a VFX editor do all the temp VFX, and you can have a sound designer do the sound design if things get too busy. But for the most part, it's just the editor and the assistant editor doing all that stuff. You have to love it. I mean, you have to really love it because it can be a lot of work and a lot of extra time gets put into that. And nobody knows what you did or how hard you worked unless you're that close to the project. I mean, you really, you get a lot, you're shown a lot of gratitude, and you're obviously, like, you get a lot of compliments of, like, hey, great job with that, great job with this. But really, when you are an editor or an assistant editor, like, you don't get a lot of the glory after. And that, you have to be okay with that. You're not the actors, you're not the director, you're not the producer, you're not the writer, you're the editor. Even though you have all this input, as you pointed out, sometimes you don't get that recognition. I think things have changed nowadays where, like, I do think editors are getting a lot more appreciation because I think as the culture is changing, as the kids are getting more knowledgeable about technology and editing their stuff, which is, like, very sophisticated. Like, some of the stuff I've seen on YouTube by, like, 15-year-olds, I'm like, wow, like, we're talking about FMTV back in the day. Like, these kids would blow us out of the water what they can do now. So I do think there's more of an understanding of behind the scenes stuff. But I would just say, by and large, like, yes, to point out what you said earlier, the expectation is there to put extra effort to making a rough cut feel like a final cut.
Yeah, it's like it's a cool thing. I mean, I was watching one sequence where uh there's somebody who's handcuffed inside a car, and somebody else who was lighting the car on fire. And just, like, looking at that final version, I was just thinking about you in the editing room, like, getting this opening sequence to be like, all right, here are all the temp effects, because if I can't communicate effectively how these temp effects have to turn into real effects, no matter what I do, it's gonna fail. And I think that communication line is really important. The other thing that I just want to put out there is that you brought up the idea that, or at least the way I interpret it, that the editor has to love all aspects of the process because you're the one who's going to handle them. And as somebody who was able to use Teen Wolf as a jumping off point to eventually work on Krypton, knowing that you were going to be stepping into a role where you are literally immersing yourself in everything DC Universe Superman prequel must have been a monumental moment for you.
Amazing. Yeah, that was incredible. It felt like this was meant to happen. This is how it was always supposed to play out, right? Yeah, I got really invested, of course, because I love the source material and I love being a part of it. And that crew was incredible. The people I worked with, like we still talk to this day, like that was an incredible show to work on, not just for the show itself, but the people. The people were so cool. The post department was great. The directors were great. Showrunners, the writers, we were all in the same building together. So like we got along, we met each other a lot. We would have parties, watch parties for the show. So yeah, like you look at those moments in your career and you go like, wow, like it all kind of came together. I can go further in about that, but I also think that, and maybe this is something we'll touch on later. I want to get into the idea of like when you enter that different phases of your career. I think there's a phase where like you just want to get in. Okay. So that was like early in my career. And then the next phase is I want to work on projects that are big projects that I love the source material. I'm a fan of the source material. I want to be a part of that. And then I think there's another phase of your career where you start to realize I'm not necessarily chasing achievement. I'm chasing or moving up, if you will. Like that is kind of like incidental. I want to be almost utilizing my skills in a way that is purposeful, that is meaningful, that has value. So I don't know if you want to get into that later, and I could just stay on the topic of working on the dream project.
Well, let's stick right now. Sorry, listeners. Let's stick with Superman. Let's talk about Krypton. Let's talk about that project, and then I will happily dovetail that into, making sure that your work holds significance to you.
Well, yeah, I think all of it is significant. It all plays a part in your life. Like you learn things, you develop relationships, you get better at what you do. Krypton was a great amalgamation of passion for source material and also learning to get further and closer to the center of a kind of like the showrunner and producer relationship. I was sort of like what you would call the first assistant or like the main assistant on the show because I worked on the pilot. And for your listening audience at home, pilot is the first episode of any new show. And it is the proof of concept. It is the launching off point. It is the thing that gets made first. And then the studios decide, do we want to make this into a show or not? And that's why it's the pilot. Most of the time, they greenlight the show being before the pilot's made. But for the most part, a pilot gets made and then a decision process happens and then the show gets picked up or it doesn't. The pilot, as you can imagine, takes a lot of time. In fact, it takes 4 to 5 times as long as making a regular episode of television because all of the energy, all the focus is making sure like this episode is the best it can possibly be because we want it to get picked up. Also, we want people that are fans of the show to get into the show right away. So it feels like a movie. When I worked on that pilot, it was like 5 or 6 months of working on one episode of television. It went through so many changes in the sense of like, we had a version of the show. And then when it got picked up, we had to reshoot certain parts of the episode so that would fit into the season. Because I was there from the beginning, I was very much having a relationship with all the people involved, all the VFX people, the showrunners, the director, like you are interfacing with these people constantly because you're there all the time and you're the one assistant editor. You're the person that they talk to for anything that involving assistant editing needs, and you're taking notes, and you're like really in there. And so that felt great because I could kind of build the workflow to the show. And I had never had that opportunity before. And building a workflow is just sort of like, this is how we do it. This is how we do the formatting for the show, the what we would call the slates for the show. This is the style of the what we call recaps, just teeing up what happened in the last episode. Like you're there from the beginning to help establish all that. Obviously, the editor and the producers and all that are doing the overall vision of the show, but you are there to kind of help with the details of like, okay, now like how do we make it so this is a well-oiled machine that everyone can jump into? What episode does this happen in? Like, can we pull music from this and that? And like, is there a bin that has all the sound effects and these specific for these specific things that happen in the show? Like that was my job to help with that. And I loved doing it because I loved the show and I wanted, things to, I wanted to be helpful to other people. I wanted to help out anyone that was new to the show, new editors that were coming onto the show. So when you become kind of that part of that, you get really invested and you're like, oh man, I hope they pick it up for another season, because we did season 1 and they picked it up for season 2. The last part of Krypton that I remember was, I got to co-edit, which was awesome. I co-edited on an episode. It was so much fun. Again, I got to do a lot more visual effects type stuff. I got to be more involved with like the music and all that stuff. The hope was that maybe season 3, I could be full time. Well, the show got canceled after the second season. So then you're like, oh, all that energy, all that time, love that all of us put into that show. It feels like such a gut punch. But that is more often what happens than not. Like Teen Wolf and shows that have multiple seasons, that is rare that happens. That's rare. Most shows, I don't know if they go past the season 1 or 2, and it's for a lot of different reasons. Sometimes it's just the timing. Sometimes it like just doesn't find its audience, and you have no control over that. No matter how much time and effort you put into something, it can be the greatest show ever. Sometimes it doesn't find its audience, you know? So I think the question you ask yourself is, what happens after that? Okay, so you had this dream opportunity. It's out of your hands, but it's over, you know? So what happens next? Well, you got to find the next show. And sometimes that show, you do it because you like the people, and then maybe you're a fan of the show, maybe the show's great, and other times maybe it's not your style of show, but you learn to like do the best you can and enjoy parts of the job that you enjoy doing, and just go like, hey, this show isn't for me, but I'm happy to help. And you realize like that Krypton opportunity is like, it feels like it rarely happens that everything kind of comes together like in that way. But you cherish that. You cherish those jobs. You go like, hey, that was cool that I did that. I think what you learn afterwards, you don't have to put all of it, all that energy and all that passion into one thing.
I think there's also something to be said about, like, one of the running gags in my life right now is if I ever describe myself as middle-aged, people get offended, and I'm like, but I'm describing me, like, like if I make it to 70 and I expire, this would have been middle-aged. That's how math works, right? But when you reach this point, and if you've been hustling, and if you've like surrounded yourself with people who support you or had the luxury to have that, you eventually reach milestones. It happens. It's just a natural thing, whether you recognize them or not. And I feel like at this sort of point in our careers, you get to these moments where you're like, oh my God, I've always dreamed of this. Like, even in this moment right now, like, I've always dreamed of having like my own interview show since I was in graduate school. And like, this is happening. This is so cool. And then you like say, am I passionate about it? Well, I am. Awesome. Let's see what we can do with this thing. And then when it moves on, or when you get to that point where you're like, you have that new set of dreams, you got to move to the next thing. And I guess my question for you, Corey Trench, is you reached this, I want to place my mark on Superman in some way. And you were an important cog in the system. Dare I say you were somebody building the cogs for, Krypton. Like what was that next set of goals for you? How did you want to sort of make sure that like your work had impact that meant a lot to you?
Yeah, so I think throughout my career in the kind of like as a background thing or almost like a side thing, I would still make my own projects. I know at one point I had a web series called Self Unemployed. This is back when I was working on Punked, or even before I worked on Punk, when I was actually unemployed after Parks and Rec. And it was just me getting, it was like similar to in high school, getting my friends together. Like, so in this case, I was getting former college friends together to make this like office style mockumentary about what it's like to be unemployed in Los Angeles. I also did this documentary about my dad having lost his father when he was 15 years old, and the story of how he was struck by lightning and died in a barn in Goochland, Virginia, and then about helping my father find closure from a situation like that and learning about what you will do to face a traumatic experience. And that was called A Fortunate Son. So I made that during my Teen Wolf time when I was working on Teen Wolf. And then there was a period of time during the Krypton era, because I did work on Krypton, but then I went and worked on Star Trek and went back to Krypton. And then after that, went to another show. So things started, I was working a lot, even despite something like a show I was passionate about, getting canceled. So there was a kind of a long period of time where I wasn't working on any of my own projects because I just felt like I'm too tired. I'm like exhausted at the end of the day. So I have no energy to work on these little things on the side. It did feel like, hey, I'm working in an industry and I'm getting paid and this is great and this is what I want to do. But where's the fulfillment? Where's the joy of why I decided to be in this business in the first place? Like, where is that? At some point, you go on autopilot and you're like, you're doing the job, you're doing it well, like you're working hard, but you're not feeling like there's a lot of you in it. It's just like you're fulfilling a service. That was a me problem, obviously. That was no one's problem but mine. I think it didn't really click until honestly this past year, because obviously our industry went through a whole upheaval with the writer's strike, and then also with a lot of shows going overseas. There was a whole year I didn't work, a whole solid year, like of nothing. That was a real, I mean, and there are other people that are still not working. And that was a real gut check moment because like you feel like your whole identity is gone because you're like, okay, the one thing I did have is gone. Like I was putting my whole identity in just working. Now working is gone. And what do I have left? And of course I had a lot, I had a lot, I had my friends, I had my family, I had music, I was still playing in the band at the time. I wasn't working on my own projects and I wasn't feeling the joy that I had felt when I first started. The real reality check wasn't until I fully I came to this epiphany because before the strike happened, before all the downturn in the industry happened, I had lost my youngest brother in 2021. He had a long battle with schizophrenia, happened kind of in his 20s, and progressively got worse into his 30s. And then as I'm on the job I get a call from my parents and they let me know that, my brother passed away, and we found out that he died by suicide. So that whole shock happens. But then with the grief process, sometimes it doesn't catch up with you until later. As the industry was in the downturn, 2024, right? So that whole year didn't work. It gave me time to reassess, like, what is the purpose of why you're even here, why you're even doing what you're doing? Like, what is the real value, the value you feel for what you're doing? I came to this epiphany that, knowing that, my youngest brother, Colin, he was always very supportive of what I was doing. And he actually helped me on a few projects. He helped me on A Fortunate Son, that documentary I did with my dad. He held the camera when we shot the pivotal scene of my dad and I visiting the barn where his father died. It sort of all hit me all at once. And I was like, I think I do this because I find a joy in working on things, telling stories that make a positive impact on the world around me, that helps other people. And I provide a service that is helping someone's reality, their dream, come into reality. So when I work with directors that are like up and coming, when I work with friends that have a short that they want to make, they know I'm an editor. When I see, like, hey, I have this idea, and I go, oh, tell me about it, and they're really passionate about it, and I go, well, we can make that happen. Like, let's go. Let's do that. I almost kind of circled back to the very beginning. Like, everything came full circle. Okay, I'm working with my friends again. We're making things. We're excited about making things. Oh, wow, this was the joy I felt back in high school. That was that feeling. I don't think I ever lost it. I don't think it ever ever left me, but I needed to be reminded of, like, well, this is why you're doing it. Achievement is great. I think goals are great. I think when you're young, you need to have those things to get you on the right path. But as you enter middle age, is what you're saying, and I'm turning 40 in May, I do think you start to see the back half of your life and you go, okay, what's the rest of my life going to look like? How do I want to live? How do I want to, what kind of energy do I want to put out there in the world? Because there's so many awful things that are happening. And you're like, what can I do? Like, what can I provide? Like, what am I good at? There's some people that are great advocates, they're great campaigners, they're great activists, and they're really great at that. And that's what we need. But what am I good at? And like I said earlier, and as you pointed out, I think I'm good at bringing people together. I'm good at providing an energy. I'm good at providing creative problem solving. I'm good at bringing a positivity that, hey, we can do this. We can pull this off, and we can do it together. That is the real joy of doing what I do, is you're part of a team. You're part of a effort to make somebody's idea that came from their deep, deep, deep subconscious, that they said, this is the idea that needs to get out there into the world. They had to have a passion to do it. Like, why do anything if you're not passionate about it? You have to do it. How can I be that person that helps them? That is the real joy. That is the real reason that I do what I do. And it's not to say, like, these jobs that come on, obviously I like working and keeping the lights on and all that. I find the joy in doing that and helping out in what I'm doing. And I contribute when I contribute to on those type of jobs. But then I think the real work, the real, like, who I really am, it comes out a lot in these side projects, in these things that I would do for free. Like, I think at one point, I was cutting something. I didn't necessarily know if I was going to be the editor on it. I was just what they call the DIT, the person that backs up all the files and stuff like that. But then I started cutting it. I just did this on my own. And then I showed them the cut, and they're like, this is great. Do you want to edit this? Like, do you want to be the one that edits this? Yeah. But at the end of the day, when I was cutting that, I didn't have that in mind. I wasn't like, yeah, I hope they pay me and I hope they do this. It just sort of, it came about through just the joy of doing it. And I think just something for all the young people out there and your students, I think that's something it's good to recognize that, and take stock of that is like, what is the thing you would just be doing just for fun, and you wouldn't care what anybody thinks, you wouldn't care like how much money you're going to get paid for it, you're drawn to it because you're drawn to it for the joy of doing it. That is the thing that I think is the ultimate test, and really tells you like, this is the thing that keeps you going, this is why you want to do what you do. All the stuff about finding work, finding, stable lifestyle, all that stuff, money, I think that all comes however you want to make that work. But the ultimate goal is always, what is the thing gets me up every day? It gets me excited to like live my life. And what do I want to put out there in the world? These are the things you come to 40 years into life. And you go, oh, so I should have just listened to that 15-year-old version of me. He had it all figured out. So let me just go back to doing that, but that's life. That's how it kind of works.
I love it. And I think, whenever I'm working with somebody who's like having a hard time figuring out what's going on, or quite frankly, just reflecting to myself, like, what are the things that just like make me feel alive or whatever, two of the questions I often pose are, one is, what did you want to be when you were 12? And then the other one is, what do you do to procrastinate? Like, you need to be doing this other thing. What's the thing that you end up spending your time doing, or you daydream about spending your time doing? Because oftentimes those impulses are there for a reason, and they stick with us. And I'm a firm believer that if you don't tap into your creative side, that it becomes a demon that will come back for you. You have to like let yourself exercise that creative side of your mind, not put it off for some other higher calling or something with a better bank account at the end. Like, you have to tackle that creative component within you to satisfy yourself and to live a fulfilling life, and then to eventually figure out how that can turn into the rest of the successes that you think you want. I mean, those two things come together. I want to thank you for talking, so delicately and so directly about your brother's passing. I hope it's okay that I bring this up, but you're currently working on a project about him, and you're kind of putting your energies there. And I was wondering if you could tell us. I know this is early in that process, but if you could tell us a little bit about what you're doing for your brother.
Yeah. So and thank you for saying that. Yeah, that was coming out of that whole year of like, what do I do? What's next? I'm not working. And I thought, well, I got to make a film. Maybe I'll make a film. And I remember writing it down in my journal, because I have like a little journal, like a production journal for the film. Like, I write little ideas of like, I got to do this, I got to do that, interview this person, interview that person. And I remember writing down early in the journal, I said, I want to make a sequel to A Fortunate Son, and it's going to be about my brother Colin, because I feel like the themes are very similar. It's about grief, it's about acceptance, but it's different, because back when I was making a film about my dad losing his father, I was on the other side of this, where it was someone that passed away before I was even born. I thought grief was all about closure and facing that trauma, and then you can move on with your life. This film, and as far as where I'm at with it, I filmed a lot of it. There's more to be filmed. I have like a rough cut, and I have a friend of mine who's producing on it, who's helping me get more ideas of what we can do to kind of make the film set itself apart. And one of the ideas is making animations for reenactments, but doing them in an artistic way. But to get back to what I was saying about revisiting this idea of grief and the journey. So Fortunate Son, I thought it was all about closure and moving on. Well, now being on the other side of it, having felt the grief and gone on the journey, I realized it's not about closure. It's about opening that door and stepping through it and entering the world and accepting that world around you, and knowing that there are other people that feel the same thing you're feeling, and you're a part of that world. it's a whole world. It was on the other side of that door, but now you're in it. And I think what the film has really done for me is it's created that renewed sense of purpose. Like I'm doing the film for a reason. It's renewing my passion for making films again, but it's also telling the real story about my brother's life, who he was as a person, like what's it like to lose a family member, and how does everyone feel about that, and what kind of conclusions do you come to at the end. Putting it out there for an audience of people that will get it right away. Like there's a whole audience of people out there that have gone through something similar. It just kind of like is another kind of validating thing. Like you're not alone in this feeling. Like this is not just you, even though it feels like it at the time. Like you're not this like person that feels this way in strange way. It's like, no, this is a normal thing that you go through. To make a positive message out of something so tragic, I think would be a good tribute to my brother, and take the life lessons that he put out there of being kind, just being so much an advocate for other people. And we kind of need more of that in this world, to be quite honest with you, more empathy. So doing that, but also reminding others, we're all going to go through this at some point, sadly, but we're all going to go through this process of life, but death, and finding your purpose after that, reassessing that there's a whole life you got to live, and you got to do it because I feel like, one, it's probably what our loved ones would want us to do, but it's also like there's more that you can give, and that's about giving to the world rather than taking, rather than being selfish. And we're all capable of like doing selfish things, and not to say like you have to be this like altruistic person at all times, but just asking yourself, what can I do with the skills that I have to do something positive and to make an impact? Like what's the thing? And my thing, my skill set is video making, and I've realized that that's who I am. That is like what I do. And it's funny how like when you put that energy out there, stuff comes your way. Like in making the documentary, I never thought I was going to get other people to help me make it. I would mention it, and they're like, "Oh yeah, I can do the animation," or "Oh yeah, I'll produce." It's amazing to me. It's like incredible. It's the incredible the side of humanity that gives you hope, that doesn't like disappoint you. It's that, oh wow, people do come together and they do want to help you, and that encourages you to help other people. But yeah, I'm excited for the film to be made. I think probably gonna come out in a year or two. But yeah, there's a long road, but a lot of it's done. So now it's just like getting the other stuff that we need to tell the story.
I love it, and I just want to chime in about the other people helping out thing. Is I think there's two types of people out there. I think there's people that have a heart that really wants to make art in some way and hope that people will benefit from it. And then I think there's everybody else that wants to help and bring that art into fruition and just doesn't necessarily know how. And the only way that those two groups of people can connect is if the people who have that immense pulse in them that says, I need to make this, I need to tell this story, actually communicate it honestly and thoughtfully, the rest falls into place. And I think so often we live in a world right now where everybody just sees the final product, or they just see the thing that somebody's bragging about, or they just see somebody who's in control and they feel they're helpless. And it makes us forget that like we do have creative ambitions, and even if we're having a hard time finding the one that we want to bring to fruition, we have friends and family members and or just strangers and communities that we're a part of that also want to do those things. And if we're willing to talk about them, we can actually like gain power by making art. And I love hearing about this process for this documentary about your brother, because I think that's just such a living testament. And I'm excited that we're getting this glimpse right now, because I have no doubt that by the time you make this and it hits film festivals, and you're holding screenings and you're connecting people with mental health workers and you're doing all the amazing things that are going to come from this project, that every little connection that you just mentioned is going to be amplified times a million. And I think that is a magic, magic thing.
Wow. Thank you, Ryan. I hope so. David Lynch said it best that like there's all these ideas out there and they're just floating around. All we have to do is be patient and we can catch a great idea. The documentary, it was just an idea that was out there and I was just around to catch it.
Awesome. Well, Corey, we've spanned over almost 40 years of your history. You've done a lot of great things. Before we wrap up, I've got three final little elements. Number one is that this episode is going to drop 10 days before your birthday. And my first question is, what do you hope to be doing, or what do you plan to be doing to celebrate your 40th birthday?
I'm going to be surrounded by friends. I'm a big baseball fan, so most likely seeing the Los Angeles Dodgers playing, hopefully singing some karaoke. That'd be fun.
All right, I'm so looking forward to following up on this to see if that happened. And I'm instantly brought to the reference in the movie Escape from Alcatraz, where he's like, "How are the New York Dodgers doing?" He's like, "They moved to LA."
That's a good one.
Number two is, I always want to wrap up the show just to see if there's anything that we haven't covered that's sort of on your mind, or anything that you want to kind of throw out there. So, is there anything that you want to put out there that we haven't made our way to yet?
Oh, I mean, I know it's beside the point, but actually, maybe it is the point. I know you said earlier that, I wasn't very talented to be featured in the videos or whatever. Well, I just have to say that, like, I don't know. I think you were too busy to be part of the videos. First of all, you were always doing something. Like you were doing like, the camp. You're doing the special. What was that camp that you did?
Camp Good Days and Special Times.
Yeah, you were doing that. You're doing a lot of other like side projects. Most importantly, I think our creative like involvement together was being in a band, Video Game Logic, where like I really learned how to be in a band because of that group. Like you and Phil, like the song structures, the arrangements. I really learned how to feel comfortable to be like an actual band. So I feel like our connection in that way, like it really creatively was like it made me comfortable. I was like, wow, like this could be fun, and it was. And it was like probably the best band I was ever in. So, I mean, yeah, man, don't sell yourself short.
Well, I so very much appreciate that. For anybody who's interested, I guess you're gonna have to go do some online hunting to find the recording sessions of Video Game Logic. But we were a little three-piece. I don't even know if you could call us a punk band, because I think every song we wrote was like a song from a different genre. But we did have what I thought would have been our great hit in the nerd world. And actually, quite frankly, in 2025 right now, there's space for this, which is the one Corey Trench I'm talking to wrote amazing lyrics to a song about Eddie Gordo, a character in the Tekken video games. And, I'm quite proud to say that our Eddie Gordo song was a remarkably catchy tune.
That was a group effort. I'm so glad you guys were on board for that. It was super fun. I love Tekken, and Eddie Gordo is an amazing character, but also the cheapest character ever.
Well, for listeners, just to get one last glimpse into your creative side before we depart, you've been a drummer the whole time I've known you, and there is an interesting connection. I mean, obviously musicians and people who work in Hollywood, but I had Richard Christian Matheson on the show, who was the lead writer for the A Team, and he wrote he wrote a ton of movies, mostly horror, some comedy stuff. Amazing novelist, but he is a classically trained drummer, and still that is like a big part of what he does. And I'm curious about, like, for now that I'm stealing what was the last thing you want to talk about thing from you? How do drums still play a role in your sort of creative processes?
Yeah, I mean, I still play. I have this band called Super Cluster. We're all friends. It's kind of like something we do on the side. We recorded a 3-song EP. And so if you look us up on Spotify, Supercluster, and the first song is called Permanent. That's us. I know there's other Superclusters. We're the best one. Drums, of course, it's the thing I was the most attracted to. I'm self-taught, not classically trained. I would say I'm adequate at best, but I think what drums teaches you, it teaches you to listen to what other people are playing and serve the song. Like the song is number one. Showing off chops, all that. It's cool, but like it doesn't fit the song sometimes. And that was something I just got ingrained in me early on. Like you're part of the team. You got to hold everything together. Like there's a lot of pressure, but that's what editing is too. Like editing is a part, you're holding it all together. Like you're not the lead guitar player, cinematographer, lead guitar player. You're not the lead singer, that's the actor. And you're not like the I'm gonna give you a better role. You're the bassist, so you're gonna be the showrunner. So you're not any of these people. You're the editor, you're the drummer. So you got to hold all their amazingness together and get them on the right tempo. And that's all editing is. So I feel like drumming informs a lot of what I do all the time. It's just an extension of what kind of role I play.
I love this. So we can find Supercluster on Spotify. Look for that song Permanent. You can look up Corey on IMDb and see his amazing credentials working on Almost Paradise and Leverage Redemption and, a ton of other really cool indie projects, but also, checking out his Teen Wolf episodes. But for people who want to get to know the Corey Trench, where do they find you online, Corey? Where are the best places to hunt you down?
So I'm on Twitter, Corey Trench, CoryTrench, but I'm mostly off social media for the most part. I think the best place your listeners can reach me or see my work is my website, CoreyCuts.tv. That's COREY cuts CUTS.tv. And so they can catch me there.
That sounds great, Corey. Well, this has been an absolute pleasure, man. Thanks for the chats.
Oh man, thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
Corey Trench, once my friend for 20 years, hopefully your friend now through this conversation. What an inspiration and just what a deep dive into the background of editing technology. I just love it. I love the systems. I love hearing how Hollywood works. And I'm so excited that Corey is an integral part of this. Go check out Corey's website and be on the lookout for his new film as it comes to fruition. I think it's going to be an inspiration to everybody. Looking ahead, I have another awesome human on the podcast. On June 4th for episode 49, DJ Rose is coming on the show. And if you're unfamiliar with him, he's a sort of an interesting legacy figure in the punk and hardcore space. He was a singer for the band Path of Resistance. He's the owner of Halo Tattoo in Syracuse, New York. But he's also a community builder, a family man, just an all-around interesting person. And in this conversation, we're going to talk about entrepreneurship, about subculture becoming mass culture, and just sort of take a look at the way in which perceptions of us can, sometimes impact who we really are, or other times can just be lore that is created elsewhere. If you're looking for more conversations about film and television, my backlog of Meditations podcasts might have a few episodes that'll speak to you. On episode 2, I chat with Nick Parisi about the legacy of Rod Serling, the famed scriptwriter and creator of The Twilight Zone. On episode 5, I chat with Mark Silk, who's a voice actor and was the voice of Bob the Builder in the United States for almost 10 years. On episode 10, I chat with Tim Allen, a stop-motion animator who's worked with Tim Burton on The Corpse Bride and Frankenweenie, worked with Wes Anderson on Isle of Dogs and Fantastic Mr. Fox. Or we can take a look at the actual physical making of film. On episode 13, I chat with Phil Vigent, who is the owner of Pro 8mm, one of the top 8mm film production people in the United States. Episode 31, I chat with Henri Houston, who's an executive for Netflix, formerly an executive for HBO, talking about the sort of business of the motion pictures. And then episode 39, I chat with Richard Christian Matheson, who's a screenwriter, most known for having written 3 O'Clock High, but he also wrote an amazing Stephen King project called Battleground, which is one of my favorite pieces of television. If you're interested in learning more about me, the person behind Meditations, you can find The World of Ryan Zlomek on Facebook. You can find @Ryan Zlomek on Instagram, TikTok, and Blue Sky, or you can email me meditations@ryanzlomek.com. I'm always looking forward to hearing from you and just get an idea about what you appreciate about the podcast or what questions you have. But that's enough about me. This show isn't about me. It's about making space in the world. I encourage you to go out, find something you're passionate about, delve into it just as Corey has, and see what you can learn about yourself. But in the interim, don't forget to make space for conversation because you just might learn something. Have an awesome day. Here's a digital high five.